person, looking back at when I started, we're talking about a long time ago, about 50 years or so, when I started being interested in Japan by chance. And that is the funny thing with it. It's not that I have a connection with Japan, there's no family in Japan, I've never been, by then I'd never been to Japan. And it basically happened because I was doing a project on volcanoes. And why do you say volcanoes? Well, in those days we didn't have internet, we didn't have huge libraries, especially where I was living, in the middle of a village in the middle of Holland. And we did these projects to get information, to start learning to write at about 12 years old. And the object was about volcanoes, like I said earlier, and I wrote to all kinds of embassies about Japan, about volcanoes. Do you have any information about volcanoes? Like I said, internet didn't exist. So from a lot of them I got information back, and from the Japanese embassy I got a whole book back, like a nice big book with lots of information, and that basically attracted me so much that I started to get interested in Japan. So my next project was about Japan, and from that came my interest in what is Japan all about. So like I said, there was absolutely no connection. That made it quite interesting to be interested in a country that you don't know anything about, you've never seen, and you want to know more about. From that came also the interest in clothing, in kimonos, in prints, in lots of different things. And over the years, as a kid, you don't really have a lot of money, so my first print I bought maybe 5 or 10 years later by chance, because it was a cheap one that I could afford. There were not that many shops that would sell Japanese things like you have now, and all that was actually quite exciting. Somebody came back with a present, that actually went to Japan, gave me a present, and by the time I was like 23 or so, I finally managed to get money together to actually go to Japan. That was my biggest wish, to actually go and see Japan, which makes it even more interesting knowing that it was my first flight all the way to Japan via Anchorage, which in those days there was no direct flight from Holland to anywhere in Japan. You always had to go via the north, because you couldn't fly over Russia, and there wasn't a stop in Anchorage, so it was quite a long flight as well. I was on my own, never flown before, didn't speak Japanese, that was one of my major problems, and didn't have a lot of money, but organised a few trips, organised the hotels, had a contact with somebody from the same company that I was working for in Holland, and that was my first experience. And I bought a few kimonos there, bought a few prints there, some tiny little things, because to me everything was mega expensive in those days. The yen was very strong. I'm talking about 82, 83, so it was very, very strong. Then I came here. I actually moved from Holland to the UK. I didn't really do a lot with Japan at the moment in time. Small things for myself, reading about it, collecting books, collecting things. I came here, and funnily enough, and that's the connection I have with this place here, and in those days this was a Japanese antique shop. The parents of David, who runs the place now and who runs Isen, his parents were owning here not kimono shop, an actual antique shop. And my first real kimono, my biggest kimono, like this style here that you see, the uchikake type wedding kimono. The first one I bought was actually in his parents' shop. And I came back 2 days later to buy the second one. And I still remember they were costing at the time, they were 125 UK pounds, which for me was a lot of money. Because they were second hand and they were affordable as a second hand object. And I see them as objects. I don't see them as things to put on necessarily. I don't wear kimono. First of all, because I'm too big for most of them anyway, and secondly, because they are these, for example, are very heavy. I see them as art objects, because when you hang them on the wall with a stick through the arms from one side to the other, you get like a square shape or a T shape, whatever way you open them on the inside, and that makes it an object of like a painting for me. So in my house, or in our house, we have them on the wall as decoration, and that works really well because most of them have really interesting designs. The materials are nice, the colours are nice, the techniques they use are all different. So for me, I see them as art objects. My problem as a collector is that you don't stick to just a kimono. You don't only have one kimono. You have 2 kimonos, you have 3 kimonos. Then suddenly you end up having 50 kimonos, and then suddenly you have 80 of these and 200 or 300 of other styles of kimonos, because obviously every single style is a different object. is a different thing you want to collect, and you never want to just have one. You can't have enough kimonos, no? There's a saying that you can't have enough scarves and gloves, but you can also never have enough kimonos. But they take a lot of space, that's the only problem, for example, with these. Then you make the mistake of meeting somebody with a job that takes it to other countries, and then you drag everything, not only from Japan to Europe, where you buy these things in different countries, because you do the funniest things to get something you haven't got yet, but you drag them from one country to another. In my case, I moved from Holland to the UK, from the UK to Italy, back to the UK, back to the UK, and from Spain, back to Spain, from there to Argentina, back from Argentina, and you drag all that stuff with you. So there are kimonos here that I have in my collection that have travelled more than many a person in his life. That's the funny thing about it. It's not very good for the kimono, but anyway, they survive. They're quite sturdy. The thing is, when you collect, you see a kimono, you see things on these kimonos, and you think, oh, that's nice to have. So you start with small things, you start with small items, you start with prints. For example, those prints here, because what do they have? They have kimonos on them, yeah? And you start looking at the designs on them, you start comparing the designs. So I starting a small collection of not necessarily the highest qualities, because there are beautiful prints in the shop, as you can see, they're all in perfect condition. Mine are not all in perfect condition, but they have an atmosphere, they have designs, and you start finding out differences from one kimono to another. And that's actually quite the interesting bit of collecting. We're talking about prints now, we're talking about kimonos on prints, but the prints itself, they obviously take less space, they're easier to drag with you, but they have so many differences in them, and you start studying those, and that's what you do as a collector, I think. It doesn't necessarily have to cost a lot. People say, oh, obviously in time you start adding up what you spend, but you don't even think about that anymore. And then you get in frustrating situations as well, that you go to a place, well, you move to a place where suddenly there is a bug that eats half of your collection. That was rather frustrating, I must say. It wasn't anymore about the money, it was more about the fact that you had a series of things that could be taken away from you because there is a bug that comes into your house. It's nature, so what it comes back to you, what it tells you is something starts and something ends. And that also happens in collecting, you know. What I'm particularly talking about in that case was a series of dolls that I had that basically made of grass or straw with very fine silks on top of them. They were eaten away by that particular bug. It wasn't a moth, it was something else. We still don't know what it is, but that was half my collection. But anyway, that's part of life. And then you start collecting something else. So as a collector, that's actually quite interesting. Why we're talking about this? Because you need to take, when you collect, you need to take the good and the bad. That's how I feel now. It's easier to say that now. You fill your house with things, so your house is somebody called Little Tokyo or Little Kyoto, because the furniture is Japanese. You start liking things that are way too big for your house, like screens, the original size screens. We're talking about screens of 3.5 meters by 180 high. And then you usually have a set of 2. It's where do you put them, you know? That's actually the most interesting thing about collecting. Another thing that happens as well is you start being more creative. I don't know if you've seen the little kimonos there at the end. Those are made of Lego, the toy Lego. There's a few other things as well that I've designed. These are my designs, and they're just cute. And you do something else with them. You bring something out into the public. Another thing that you do, trying to make things more accessible to people, and what I've done with my collection is I've tried to do exhibitions. That's a bit harder to do because that needs money, and that is something that I don't have. So you are very much depending on others, like embassies, like organizations that are interested in doing something with your collection, and that's actually very good fun. I had the chance in Argentina to show part of my collection in the Japanese garden that you have in Argentina, and that was a lot of fun to do, and it was very popular as well. So what we're talking about when we're collecting, to do something with it. One last thing that I've designed is a series of books that work with type, like these prints that you see here. These are all designs of kimonos, as are those. These are all from the late 1800 period, early 1900s. and they show you how kimonos can be produced in the future, and how they were seen at that moment in time. These prints were made already since the 1600s. In the 1600s, they already produced prints of designs of kimonos, and they were used basically by the manufacturers to sell the kimono that they can produce for you with the certain techniques, the colors, the materials, and the designs that were popular at that moment in time. I made a series of books for those that are interested to show you the different periods and the different designs, and you can see how certain designs, what my colleague Claire talked about, will come back. They are important designs for Japan. They are important for the society. They say things about period in the year we're from. We are busy in what kind of event we're talking about, what kind of environments they are being used as, and the styles of kimonos that have been available during that whole period. And that is what you do as a collector. You start collecting information, not only the objects, but also the information on those subjects that make it more interesting to look at. So that's a bit my story. That really what David was asking me to show you that you can collect. You don't have to be rich. You just need to have an eye for nice things that are different and that you can use in a different way as well. And that's why these prints are so interesting, because they show you a period in Japanese life that is different from what you see now. And like I said, these you compare to magazines that you see now, where you can find the latest designs that you next year or this particular year, or that are on sale. That's a bit of an idea of what you do as a collector. You can do lots of things, and that's a nice thing. And especially kids should start with these things, I think. Everybody should collect something. Makes life much more interesting. Any questions?
When did you start doing the Lego things with your
It was around COVID, I think. We don't want to use that word too much, but somewhere in a period that I didn't have much to do. And if you're interested, I have an Instagram page called fuyuya.spain, which is what I currently do. And I'll give you the name if you're interested. And you can see a bit of a development that's happened there with the books and with other things that I've done in the past, just in case. Any other questions? Professional, I don't really know a lot of people that do professionally. Yeah, most people do it as a hobby. I mean, some people have bigger budgets than others, obviously. So the nice thing about Japan is that they are still very generous in letting stuff go from their country to other countries. Obviously, when I was young, the first time I went to Japan, things were a lot cheaper than they are now. The Japanese have caught on that things that come from Japan are valuable, and the prices you see have gone up quite a lot since then in comparison. There are things now that I could have bought then very cheap if I would have the money, even if I would have had the money, also would have been able to take them from the country too. But you see now that everything is going up in price, also mainly because of the quality of the products. And there's a little bit different. What you get from Japan still generally tends to have a higher quality than many other countries. At least that's my opinion. This is just purely what I think. But if you look at all the products, I mean, the Meiji period around 1900, that still has beautiful, not necessarily that expensive. There are people that are collecting from sake cups, which are this big, from prints to any other thing that you can find that is bad. But me as a collector is always interested. I was always interested in things that are from day-to-day life. So that's why you end up buying furniture, old furniture, not the newly produced ones, but the older ones, because they're full of holes, they're full of damage, but they have a life, they've had a life, and they've done something. They've been there for somebody during a very long period of time. And that makes it actually quite interesting. And there's so much still to collect.
So what do you do with all your stuff now?
At the moment, it's just sitting in, I display as much as I can in the house. I try to turn over what I have, and if there's ever an interest in displaying something, I would take the house apart and we'll just go. You know, we display it, and that's the nice thing. If you have
I
things like
also
this.
collect a little bit. I was studying there for 6 years.
Uh-huh.
And I really love it. So, like I said, you know, collect this small dolls.
You collect for yourself, I
For
find.
myself, yeah.
I had a period, I had a shop in Madrid, in the middle of Madrid. Very, very tiny shop, much tinier than this. Actually, maybe the entrance that was over there. And I went shopping, and I went shopping for myself more than anything. I mostly bought things that I liked, just in case I wouldn't sell it. I could keep it all myself.
Yeah.
And that's why I have a load of stuff now, because I didn't really sell a lot. But not because it wasn't popular, but because I didn't want to sell it really. Ended up at home and then nobody ever saw it, so that's quite interesting. You have to be careful with that, huh?
I'm glad to hear that you collect because I feel like I'm a holder. Collecting everywhere I
It
go, I
depends
collect.
on what it is. It depends on what it is. Then you call the collector. You might actually be. I might be a hoarder as well. I probably don't know it, but yeah, that's true.
Because I got so many over the years because I was living there. And they throw a lot of things and I'm picking up and said, oh, I've never seen that before. Let me bring that home.
No.
That's what I do.
I know how you feel. I know how you feel.
But I like that cloth, but I never collect that kimono.
You should. They're beautiful things. Objects. Really.
That's art.
I know.
Well, you're talking about the cost of buying things in Japan. I'm not a collector, but my partner is a kimono maker here in London.
Okay.
And I have bought kimono in Kitano Tenmangu Market for 1,000 yen, which is £7, from a heap on the ground. I mean, they're not class kimonos, they're not old, but they make wonderful decoration.
The funny thing is that kimonos is one of the things that is still affordable because
Yeah.
people don't wear them anymore.
Exactly.
There is a tendency for them to start wearing them again and to make them more popular again. That's yes. But used kimonos has always been quite affordable. That's why I ended up with such a big collection because it was easy to find nice pieces. The problem is that these quality pieces, they know what they are, and those are much harder to find cheap.
Yes.
That's the big difference. So I think the most expensive kimono I have is somewhere about £400 or so. But there are kimonos out there that I know are a couple of thousand, and they are also used, but they are also very, very old. So you go to the auction houses nowadays in Japan as well, and the prices are specifically much, much higher than one kimono or another, obviously. But even wedding kimonos, I mean, I've been buying them also for a similar price like you're saying. I've been very lucky with connected with people that were helping me there, finding them. And
These are just everyday kimonos that women wore. So I just find the nice patterns and the nice, and I bought, I don't know, half a dozen probably over the years.
that's the
And
other thing.
obi as well.
Yeah, especially obis. Obis are perfect for the house.
Yeah,
They're nice as table runners, they're nice on the walls,
Yeah.
simply to decorate a little corner. And I'm also a bit of a purist in my own way, that I don't like to cut anything up. So it comes with a hole, that's fine. If it has a huge hole, like if it gets eaten up by a bug, for example, then you can do something else with it. You put it in a frame and you already have a nice picture. That's the nice thing about that sort of stuff as well. Talking about those bugs, it's a funny story. There was a whole box with kimonos, a plastic box with a lid on it. These same bugs that ate my collection of dolls, a large part of it anyway, they managed to get in the box. How they did it, I still don't know. They then went looking for the most tasty kimono you could find, because it was a series of slightly synthetic, pure silk, old silk, new silk, mixed, and all kinds of stuff. They actually went down about 4 or 5 kimonos, ate away on, for quite happily, the kimono from the Meiji period, so from around 1900. And the rest was not tasty enough, they left them alone. They were basically in the books, in the pile of kimonos, found the best tasty one, ate that one away, all of them at the same time, disappeared, because we hadn't found anything. The rest was all fine, but that one kimono and maybe one obi, they've been eating up because they were nice, pure, very, very, very thin silk. And so there you go, you think these creatures have no taste, they have taste, trust me.
It's part of your collection.
It was, but no, what I've done now, I've cut it into bits. The bits that are still left, I've now put a frame around them, and they look pretty on the wall as well. So you can always do something with them, and that's the good thing about kimono as well. Why a kimono is so valuable, because the way they are treated and the way they're being or have been treated over the century, the millennia almost, that the material has been recycled always and has been reused to make one other kimono one after another, depending on the generation. They were handed down, they were repainted, they were redecorated to make use of the expensive silks that they were, especially the silk ones. But then there's a whole culture on not necessarily only silk is important in Japan, and that's the interesting bit. Other materials can also be very important, like cotton was an important material, obviously, but you have materials based on banana leaves and stuff like that, where they make kimonos from. And those are actually more valuable than a silk kimono because they're much more difficult to create. There's a whole, we can talk hours about kimonos, there's absolutely no problem. We only had 20 minutes, so with that, I think we have to start. If there are no other questions?
May I ask if you found a way to protect the
Well, plastic bags help. Acid-free plastic bags, then less bugs will get in. But the best thing is the furniture, the right furniture and the right wrapping that the Japanese provide, because that will help you with moths, anti-moths and other creatures. So there are ways to do that, uniquely what the Japanese have done. And that is getting tansu out of Paulownia material, because they are bug repellent, and you have special rice paper folders to put the kimonos in. Fold them in the right way, the traditional way, and you get the least creases, that your silk doesn't crease up or any other material. There are quite a few ways to protect a lot of that. Anything else?
Can I ask a quick one?
Yeah, of course.
What spoke to you most about like the Japanese culture? Obviously, in the 80s, as a Westerner, when you look at maybe at Eastern cultures from like an untrained eye,
Yeah.
they might be a little more difficult to differentiate. What specifically about Japan's art style?
I think initially what impressed me was the proficiency of the book that was given, because that already was nicely produced, and I think there's where the other ones, you got some folders, some flyers, but it was a proper book, nicely maintained, there's quality to it, and I think that was the initial impression that caught my attention, the sort of thing that caught my attention. And from there, it became interesting about what you were seeing with the images that struck. There was no particular reason, because, like I said, I've never been there, I had no connection at all with Japan. Nobody in the family had been there, I'd never been there. Funny thing though is that we talked about a few years later with somebody that said that he could see previous lives. And without knowing me and my history, he told me that obviously I was Japanese at one stage in another life, if you believe in previous lives. Interestingly, what I have a big problem is studying Japanese. I speak Dutch, I speak English, I speak Spanish pretty fluently, a few other words in a few other languages. So it's not that I can't learn another language, but I have a problem with Japanese for some reason. I don't know why that is. And it is like an auto block that I don't allow myself to learn it. And he explained that in one of my previous lives, I was Japanese. Everybody is a samurai, obviously, but samurai doesn't mean you had a very important position, you were just a fighter in the end. But that I wasn't agreeing with how social life was in those days, and we're talking about anywhere before the Meiji period. And that the reason why I wasn't allowing myself to learn Japanese, because I've tried several times, but there was always a block on time, money, there was always an excuse. And I know a few words, I can get away, I get everything I need. There's always somebody that helps me, or with hand speed, translating materials and translating machines, you can get a hold of it done. So you don't necessarily need it. But he said, I was so upset with society as it was that I didn't want to learn Japanese or get into Japanese because I was afraid I would remember too many things of that previous life. This was somebody that didn't know me, didn't know anything about me, my interest in Japan. It was actually quite a nice, interesting translation to why that was not happening. And he told me basically that I've not given up, but I'm okay. And also sometimes, you know, it's better to not know everything because then people can feel relaxed and feel the Japanese are very reserved, as we know. Nothing wrong with that, but there is a touch of that as well. And you notice that as a foreigner.
Do you get any response from Iceland? Back then, my students as a turbulence asking all the embassies.
You're asking me questions. We're talking about 53 years ago. I can't remember. I did, but because most people wrote back, which is quite interesting.
But you picked Iceland.
Yeah.
Ended up in Iceland.
Yeah.
Iceland is a big volcanic country.
I know. I've been there. I've been there.
No kimonos.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But nice saunas and other things, and fish. No, I haven't been there by chance because of work, but yeah, it was typically Japan. That was the interesting bit. It was very focused on Japan and the history of Japan, and mainly for some reason kimonos because they were affordable, and for me they were art objects. So that was it's a quite different look at why would you want a kimono, because I've never really put a kimono on. I have them on to try. I'm too big for most kimonos anyway, so I'm giving up on that. So I love them on the wall. I hope you enjoyed this.
Yes.
Yeah. Get this, I hope. You're welcome.